Greetings. In this video, I would like to discuss, analyze, watch some clips pertaining to...
We have a big hole in the area of compassion for boys and men.
This is what men's rights look like! This is what men's rights look like!
The documentary has been slammed by women's groups as misogynist propaganda.
The men's rights movement and issues that are focused on by the men's rights movement, as they're shown and expounded upon within Cassie Jay's film documentary, The Red Pill. So, extremely interesting. I've watched it twice now, once a few months ago, and more recently to take some notes and really try to understand everything such that I'm able to, competently talk about it. And one of the other reasons, besides just, the men's issue, the interestingness and importance of dissecting the men's issues, the other interesting thing about it is just how indicative all of these issues are and the response to these issues is of the sort of unbelievable hypocrisy of the modern far left. I mean, I really hope if there's one thing other than, bringing attention to the importance of some of these men's issues that I hope to, convey in this video, it's just how extreme and absolutely ridiculous some of these reactions are by feminists. The hypocrisy is just... I can't even wrap my head around how a group of people so focused on inclusivity and, egalitarianism could be so outrightly discriminatory, offensive, and bullying towards another group. And I will show the clips of that kind of behavior so that, you can see exactly what I've seen and see it from my perspective. So with that being said, you might be thinking... If you've seen my video on why contemporary feminism is nonsense, you might be thinking, Elf's Void, are you a hypocrite? Why are you making a video on men's issues after you've made a video denouncing feminism? And the answer to that question is that, more or less, to put it simply, I'm for the equal treatment, or I'm for fair treatment of both sexes, and fair analysis and fair treatment of the issues that face them both. And I could make a video talking about what are actually, outside of feminist ideology, what are real feminist issues, etc., but it's completely unnecessary because it gets unbelievable coverage on everywhere all the time. It penetrates through universities, media. It doesn't need anybody else to talk about it. If you're alive today, I'm sure you have an idea of what the issues are. But can you, whoever you are, if you haven't seen The Red Pill, can you name the issues that are specifically men's issues? I couldn't before. So that's why I think that's important on a personal level, and then on a sort of socio-historical level, I think one thing that's really important to understand too is that since the real growth and penetration into universities, colleges, political ideological life since about the 60s of feminism, all of our societal sort of scrutinizing of gender has been focused mostly with the aim of betterment on female issues, right? It's been all centered on female because the interpretation is that females have, always had the sort of lower hand in society. They need the most help, and all of their problems, etc., are the result of patriarchy, the result of men. Men have it the best. They have no issues. We don't need to pay attention to that. The only thing we need to focus on is, those things which affect the vulnerable and marginalized. So for that reason, society has acted as if that men are genuinely have been the concrete oppressors, and that they don't really have any substantive social issues or gender-specific issues. And so, yes, so what I hope to show in this video through my analysis of The Red Pill, so the main issues, at least, in The Red Pill, is that it's just patently absurd. And that we can't, as a society, collectively continue on that way because it's very disingenuous, it's very one-sided, and it's very, very ignorant. And so, yes. So what we will do is we will do some talking about those main points, and then we'll look at some clips, some reactions, some things that sort of demonstrate exactly what those men's rights activists are talking about.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
So the reason that Cassie J called her documentary The Red Pill is based not only on the clip you just saw, but on how some members of the movement, of the men's rights movement, refer to themselves, which is, namely, you have two options. You can stay asleep, you can believe the narrative that you're told to believe, or that you're made to think is true, or you can take another pill, the red pill, and you can see reality for what it really is. You can go down a sort of rabbit hole of different perspectives and truth. And so for her, she came at this from the perspective of a feminist. She was a hardcore feminist. Like, if you watch the documentary, you'll know that she had a lot of really terrible experiences trying to be an actress, a lot of discrimination, and eventually it came to the point for her where she just, said, screw it, and got a camera herself and started making documentaries on specifically women's issues. And she heard about the MRA, so men's rights activists, or I should say MRM, men's rights movement, by virtue of the sort of propaganda demonstrated in the media. And so it was from her initial outrage of the media's portrayal of the men's rights movement that she was led in to make this documentary and sort of understand things for herself. And what she came to find through her the whole course of her making the documentary was that what these people actually believe is very, very far from how they're portrayed in media. And so after finishing the film and finishing talking with all these people and being showed this sort of different perspective she wasn't aware of, she no longer calls herself a feminist. She is, I don't know if she would say that she's an anti-feminist, but she no longer adheres to that kind of ideology. She cares about men's issues, and she cares about women's issues, and she doesn't need to attribute herself as falling in either category. That is, I'm not a meninist, I'm not a feminist, I'm just, a person who cares about people. So I think that's a really important point of contextualization, because as we'll see later, she was heavily demonized by the media also for making this film, even though she makes her position very, very clear, and her history is very, very clear that she's not just, some propagandist putting out this stuff. She came from the other side, and what she found was a different reality after she came out the other side. So, with that being said, first point I want to break into here is a sort of conceptualization of the ways in which men have been socially conditioned, because, as I've said, it's very clear, I think, to all of us, the ways in which women have been socially conditioned into their roles, and the ways that those roles are not just socially conditioned, but also biological byproducts of, our particular sex-specific physicalities, right? So women have historically been played the role of social reproduction, and men have largely played the role of cultural and civilization reproduction. And so, on its face, it doesn't seem too egregious, right? It seems like a sort of natural unfolding of things, which then becomes socially and culturally reinforced. But a really key dimension, I think, for us to understand is the ways in which some of that conditioning isn't just biological and isn't just cultural, but is motivated and guided by certain ideologies. So, to explain what I mean, is that obviously men, by virtue of their superior, on average, physicality, are more apt to do certain jobs than women are. That's why, for example, women pretty much don't go into a wide variety of the dirtier trades. That work is pretty much exclusively men, while some women go into it. But it is largely a male endeavor, and that male endeavor doesn't have such a innocent beginning. So I'd like to read you a quote from an article I read recently from one of my labor studies classes. The article was called Doing the World's Unhealthy Work, the Fiction of Free Choice. And basically this article focused on, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, how young boys were conditioned to sort of conceptualize themselves as separate from themselves, in a sense, separate from their bodies, as if they have a purpose that is over and above themselves as something else. So this is a quote that was in a textbook distributed to young boys in working class areas. Mind you, they were all working class areas back in that time. But basically, this was said to them with the motivation that they go into dirty, unsafe jobs. So listen to this. Our lives don't belong to us, but to the community of which we are a part. Duty is our focus. So the key there is our lives don't belong to us, but to the community of which we are a part. So what's really, really interesting about that is that the fact that those jobs that men were being conditioned into going to during that time were like, you can't even fathom. I mean, unless you're a third world worker, you have no idea that kind of suffering that goes into that kind of coal mining and all jobs of that variety. And there was a high consciousness. It's not like people didn't know how dangerous they were, that how many deaths occurred, how many accidents, all of the terrible things. Like, the extent of the injuries that were had in the name of capital during that time period are so egregious that you just can't even wrap your head around it. And people were aware. And so one of the ways that sort of political motivation seeped into the education system was by distributing these kinds of materials to young boys to sort of create in them this sense of obligation that by virtue of their strength and their ability that they owed something to the community, that they had a duty to, you know, be willing to risk death out in these jobs to create life, to create the things that we need, etc. And they did go out and do that, and they bought into that, and to an extent they still do all over the world, whether that be out of sheer necessity for needing work to provide, which is a whole other thing we're going to get into, or what have you. But it's important to realize this, that we all know how women are conditioned. Nobody is ignorant to that. We all know. But are we fully aware of those subtle ways in which men have also been conditioned over time to fulfill certain roles? And I think that's a big part about what the Red Pill film is about. It's about realizing that dimension of male conditioning as well, right? Because once we move into, you know, more civilized 1950s, etc., that role, like, you could argue that it didn't change very much for the blue collar class, but it did for the white collar class, right? So now men start to really, really have the notion of themselves as protectors and providers reinforced in society. That is, the woman stays home, she has all these new technological advances to help her with her housework, and that's her job. And men, however, have the sole brunt of going out into the workforce, supporting the family. They bear that entire sort of weight by themselves. And of course, you know, feminists see that ability to work as a privilege, as male privilege. But in a sense, I think we could argue that having that sole weight put on you by yourself isn't necessarily advantageous or necessarily indicative of power, right? Because think of yourself with a whole family dependent on just you. I mean, you might be in that position now. That's not really power. That's loss of power. That's service. That's being in debt to someone or to something. And I think that's one of the things that one of the men's rights activists, I think he was even one of the beginners of the men's rights movement, Dr. Warren Farrell, points out, is that we start to get this idea of men as success objects, right? So we see women as sex objects, and we see men as success objects, that they start to bear this brunt, that their worth and status is dependent on what and how much they can provide. And so some people might argue, well, you know, that's not such a bad thing to do, but it's like, you know what, you're ignorant and you don't realize the larger social context, because to have that weight, I don't want that weight. I mean, could provide for myself, of course, but I mean other people as well. That's an enormous burden. And to have your self-worth attached to that is also deeply problematic. And I think those are really some really difficult beginnings of the ways in which men were conditioned. And so, in line with that, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but still to this day, 93% of all workplace deaths are men, right? Because they're the ones who have been required to fulfill those roles. And that is an issue to contend with. That is a deep reality of men's reality that we just somehow seem to overlook or not really pay attention to as much. And I think this notion in there of what I've discussed of this idea of male disposability, both of his body and also of his time, in the sense of once we get into more white collar work and the male breadwinner, there's a lot of disposability in this notion of sacrifice and of going out into the world to be the one to do all of the labor to provide for the family. So, and that's not to detract from women if you're watching this. I'm just saying that that's a very unique pressure, and that's a specific form of sacrifice, and something which is deeply indicative, I think, and as these men's rights activists have pointed out, of this notion of the disposability of men. And I think we see that again reinforced in war, right? So I was talking about these sort of these subtle ways in which political influence penetrates education. And so when we think of war, what is a war? Right? Like what specific interest of a given polity do individual men have in war? It's largely a political tool. I mean, yes, there are some wars and some situations for which we feel we need to fight and defend ourselves or others, etc., but it's largely political, and again hinges on this idea of male disposability, in the sense that war is obviously not a good thing and something to be avoided, but sometimes is necessary, but is nonetheless an act of sort of giving oneself up for something else. This notion of we have a duty over and above ourselves to the community. Our bodies are ours, but in a sense not fully ours, that they are disposable. And I think that we really see men conditioned into going into, and not into war specifically, but into the army. We see these massive statues enacted and all of these ideas of respectability and value and honor and these very alluring things attached to these notions of giving one's bodies up for something else. And I think that's like, you could argue the purpose of it, whatever, but I think it's still implicitly quite insidious because it has this underlying message of the disposability of men. Because again, who are the majority of war deaths? Every given war, it's like above 98% men because they're the ones to fight in it. And it's not good. Of course it's not good. And then again, when we think of, for example, times of crisis, like I always remember as a kid watching Titanic, and once the shits hit the fan and the Titanic's going down and they're loading people into the boats, the people monitoring the boat, the people who work there, announcing women and children on the boat first. That was something that always stuck with me, and it still irritates me to this day, is this idea, because I think it's multifaceted for sure. There are different dimensions to it. Like, the presupposition that, women and children are weak and they need to be taken care of. But again, implicit in there still is this notion that men are in some sense disposable. Like, why does it make sense if your boat is sinking unless you presuppose these things about women and children being weak, but why would it make sense to separate women and children from their families or from their fathers? I mean, if you're in a terrible, life-threatening situation, what's really more important, that you get all of the women and children onto the boat, or that you keep those families together. I mean, either way, you're all headed towards heartbreak, whether you with your husband die on the boat, or whether you are separated from your husband and he dies on the boat. I mean, and we see that too, like, one of the things in the red pill was there was some plane crash, like, quite recently, like in the 2000s, where a plane had crashed into some, like, harbor of an ocean, and again, all the women and children evacuated from the plane first. It's subtle, but this disposability, this idea of disposability is there. And I don't think it can be ignored even in these contexts where it seems like there's another explanation for it, because it's too reoccurrent. It happens in too many cases too often and is not criticized or fully evaluated in any of these given cases. So, and yet another dimension of this disposability, or this lack of concern, or sort of conceptual manipulation in some sense, is this hypocrisy between how we view domestic violence, or how we view violence against women versus violence against men when it's done by the opposite sex. So an interesting statistic that I had no idea about before I saw the film was that 43%, at least in the United States, which I imagine probably carries over to the other Western countries as well, 43% of domestic abuse is initiated by women. And yet, in the US, there's over 2,000 domestic violence shelters for women, and there's one in Arkansas, of all freaking places, for men. So that seems like it's very disproportional. And it's deeply problematic in the sense, too, that it sort of carries this notion that men should be able to do something, or they should be competent enough to deal with the situation in a superior fashion. But I think this goes along with something that Jordan Peterson says often, is that violence, like, we all know this, it's intuitive, but, like, violence against men is different from, between men is different than violence between women, or between a man and a woman, in the sense that we have this notion that men can never lay their hands on women under any circumstances, even if she hits him, right? Or it just triggers some sort of, like, complete moral egregiousness. We all just become, rabidly upset by this. But when it's turned on its head, when it's the other way around, when it's a woman doing it to a man, it's a joke. It's a complete joke. Don't care about it at all. But it's even worse, because what I sort of trailed off there on is that men can't hit women back, or else they will suffer infinitely worse consequences than if the woman hits him. So what are men supposed to do in that situation? Like, of 43% of women doing this to men, like, of the domestic assault cases, what are they supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? How are they supposed to deal with it? What if they're not the breadwinners in the family? What if they don't have additional funds and there's literally nothing they can do but what? Stay in the abusive relationship? Like, to give you a sense of, like, what a joke this is made up of in popular culture, like, watch this clip.
Feel it! Alright, that was a little bit better, but... Oh!
Good?
That was good.
Alright.
That was good.
Way harder than that.
Oh!
So obviously you can see what's problematic about that video, right? It's made to be a complete joke. It's funny to do that, right? Of course, if you were to do that vice versa, no one would do it, and it wouldn't be funny, and it would be intensely scrutinized. But clearly that's fine. So check out this other one, which is... it's a lot worse. So watch this.
How can you slap? How can you slap? Mad or what, bloody? How can she slap? How can she slap me? How can you slap, bloody? Fucker! Bastard! Bloody bastard! How did you hit her? You bastard! How did you hit her? I'll fuck your face right now! You fucking bastard! I'll fucking kiss, bastard! How did you hit it? Mother chode, branch, How can she slap me, sir? How can she slap me? How can she slap you? How can she slap me? तेरी मैं जान मारता हूँ अभी बहन के लोड़े मार बहन चुप तू अपनी बहन को यहाँ भेज अपनी बहन को बहन के लोड़े तेरी औकात नहीं कुछ करने की मादर चौथ भोसड़ी का वो है क्या बहन के लोड़े
Oh, that was... I mean, like, what? I just... Like, I understand. It's like the reaction by all of those men is that it's morally egregious to hit women, and yes, I agree. No violence should ever take place. It's animalistic and unwarranted. We don't need to aggress on each other in that way. But if someone aggresses on you, then I think you are justified in defending yourself. However, the contradiction here, of course, is that if a woman aggresses on you and you're a man, well then you cannot retaliate or else you will be severely punished. In this case, we just saw a man essentially get gang beaten by a group of men. Like, where did all of these men even come from is the first question. But I'm not laughing because it's funny, because it's not, but I mean, just the absurdity of it. So I mean, that's a real hypocrisy right there. You cannot expect for men to just take it, but yet they're expected to. I mean, I can't wrap my head around that. I mean, it's just, I mean, that level of, I think some people call it white knighting, is just absurd. So I mean, more or less, what I'm trying to get at with all of this is that we're going to get to more hypocrisy, but that's a level of hypocrisy right there. But the real thing I want to focus on is just this notion that men are not permitted to retaliate in the same way that women are, or else they face severe consequences. And so moving into a bit of a different dimension of sort of more modern, I mean, that's a modern issue, but I mean, another issue that men are facing right now that's not really receiving any attention is the degree of the high rate of male suicide. So male suicide rate is at 78%. So of all the total suicides in the statistics from the US, 78% are men. Why is that so high? What issues are occurring that is making that rate so enormous? What are the pressures and influencers? How is that related to perhaps the workforce, to this notion of men's roles, to this idea of disposability, of not having a place? Or, I mean, like, how do we disentangle that? And another dimension of men's issues right now, too, that's touched on in the film, is men slipping in education, which is overtly obvious to anyone who works in a university or just goes to a university. Like, let alone the statistics, just go into a classroom and it's 60% female. Why are men slipping out of the education system in this way? Or why are they being outnumbered at such a rate? Why are they dropping out? What is going on there? And to sort of compound all of this, the climate for talking about these issues or creating a space for men to talk about these issues is extremely hostile. I mean, it is by no means welcomed, and it demonstrates such a high degree of hypocrisy that it is like incomprehensible for me to understand. I mean, I can't understand it, but we're gonna get into it. So just watch this. So here's a meeting of a committee of some MPs in the UK, where a man proposes to have a session, like a monthly session, I believe it is, to discuss things like male suicide and men's education and these issues in the workforce with men. And look at the way it's met by the committee in front of him.
We also have women and equality questions every month in the Chamber, which we don't have for men. So the opportunity for men to raise issues that are important to them is very limited. And just to give you a flavour, Mr. Chairman, of the type of things that may come up and which will be part of international Men's Day. I'm not entirely sure why it's so humorous, but to discuss issues such as men's shorter life expectancy, wider male health issues, many of which go unreported through embarrassment of men to sort of go along and talk about these things, the high suicide rate amongst men, the propensity for violence against men. There's many male victims of domestic violence, again, as something that goes very much unreported because of lots of embarrassment about it. The underachievement of boys in education compared to girls, the issues around father-child relationships, and often the way that fathers sometimes feel they don't get a fair crack of the whip in terms of custody of their children and things like that. These are all issues that affect an awful lot of people around the country. Whether people agree with some people's views or not, I think it's important that the House of Commons debates these issues. I think people can recognise that they are all very real issues for many people in the country. And so in the spirit of gender equality, given that we have the debate each year on International Women's Day, which I suspect will continue under this committee, I thought it would only be fair that we had an opportunity to debate these issues under the flag of International Men's Day, which is this year on Thursday the 19th of November.
I don't care about men's issues, it's that I'm hoping for parity myself.
Hear, hear.
I absolutely care about men's issues, and when I've got parity, and when women in these buildings have parity, you can have your debate.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, can I...
So the idea there, so like we can't understand where this is coming from. The idea is that men have prevailed for so long and they've had all of these positions of power. They've been the ones to construct society. They don't need any spaces for themselves or any special allocated time to discuss these specific men's issues that don't directly relate to females because they have all the time in the world to talk about it. They don't need an extra space. But yet women, because they've been, historically oppressed, although that's been severely lessened in the Western world for a very long time, women are entitled to these spaces, trans people are entitled to these spaces, people of minority racialized identities are entitled to these spaces. Let me tell you, I get an email, I think it's once a month, for an invite, which isn't actually for me, which is only for racialized students. It's an email. The university has this monthly session where racialized students can come and talk to racialized professors about being racialized. I mean, but like whatever. If you want to do that, I don't care. It makes no difference to me. But there's also these emergent spaces on campus, like special rooms. When I went to one university for undergrad, they had a special room for Muslims to go and pray and have, a safe space. And the same thing is happening now where we're having special LGBTQ rooms and special women's rooms and all these different groups. But as soon as men want these groups or these opportunities to have spaces to address these issues that they face that are unique to them, they're automatically denounced as misogynist, as not inclusive, and like notice the hypocrisy there, not inclusive, and then tie that to the email I was just mentioning that I get for the invite. I'm not even a racialized student, and I still get this email. I guess they can't discriminate who's racialized and who's not, so they just mass send it to everyone. But yeah, so just watch this hypocrisy. Just watch this. This is Simon University in Canada, Simon Fraser University, in which men want to construct a building or some special room for like a men's centers for specialized men's issues, men's space, etc. So watch this cancerous reaction.
Men have a lot of access to space that women don't have when we talk about having a women's center as a safe space.
The Men's Center is not about gender equality. It is not about being fair to the men at SFU.
It's a bit different than talking about a men's center as a safe space.
You need to have a community. It's essential. In order to have this safe space that we want, you need to build the community first.
I think there's a possibility for the Men's Center to become a highly masculinized space if it's not given a clear mandate for inclusion.
I think there's potential that it would become a heteronormative space.
It does not take into account marginalized or subordinate men.
Experiencing sexual assault or has depression or is grappling with any of those issues would want to enter a space where...
A room with a PS3 and a bunch of douchebags sitting around playing games?
Is it going to be trans inclusive?
In which victimized men would not feel comfortable
discussing victimization.
victimized men might not feel comfortable.
Where you don't have a mandate, something where you don't have goals, an idea of what the place is going to look like, the Men's Center will end up being a place to celebrate hegemonic masculinity rather than being a place to include all different types of masculinity. It is not collaborating with the other social justice groups at SFU.
There is a sexual assault working group on campus right now, and I know that they have not been contacted.
It's significant for them to work with the other groups so that you can make sure that you're being inclusive to all the different forms of masculinity. If the point of a men's center is to have a space where men can feel safe, then you should make sure that you are being inclusive to all forms of masculinity. Those include subordinate and marginalized men.
Hey, some women have cocks.
Jeff McCann, Keenan Midgley, and Danielle Hornstein are not the best people to be creating a men's center. It's coming from a space of hegemonic, privileged masculinity. People who are proposing the men's center, Jeff McCann, Keenan Midgley, and Danielle Hornstein, have no experience of being a subordinate or a marginalized man. They have no experience of being in a gender studies class.
They're not consulting with people who do have some information about these things and who can provide a better foundation to build this men's center on.
They must work with other social justice groups on campus,
such as the Women's Center or out on campus.
To make it better, to make it good, make it something nice.
You know, I encounter catcalling, I've been followed. I think these are pretty standard experiences for a lot of women out there.
SFU took so much care of gender issues and women's safety.
And I don't think that especially straight cis men go through their daily lives experiencing that.
In a safe enough way where it's not going to look like it's a fight against women.
I'd be in support of a men's center that was liaisoning with SF and the Women's Center and out on campus to create a safe space. I think everybody on campus would want to support a space that would help men deal with issues. I worry that that space isn't going to be a social justice space, it's just going to be another boys' club.
Creating one of the first university men's centers is a highly politicized event.
This proposal has created controversy among students at SFU.
With the controversial nature of this project, there needs to be greater financial and political oversight.
You need to actually have a
clear mandate for inclusion.
In order for this project to go forward, there must be budgetary controls.
This project is not fiscally responsible.
I feel like this process has to go the same processes that other spaces on campus have.
There hasn't been nearly enough discussion on campus for a project of this magnitude.
With such a controversial project, I believe that there should be stricter...
So, I mean, if you can't see what's wrong with that, like what's wrong with all of this, I don't know what's wrong with you. Like, part of coming, like, yes, there were injustices in the past and things weren't quite right, and the point is, however, that, you know, we're progressively moving forward. Things are changing, and a part of that changing can't be everyone gets, you know, all of the opportunities to rectify their injustices and talk about their problems and solve their issues except for men. All of your issues don't matter. We don't care. You're whiners. That's one point that that came up a lot in the Red Pill, that a lot of these men's rights activists that talk about these issues, like male suicide, male workplace deaths, male disposability, they're called whiners. But feminists literally say, like, shut up, what are you crying about? And, like, that in turn reinforces, like, for example, we have this common notion that men can't or don't want to talk about their problems. And I'm not a man, so I don't know how that works. I don't know, like, I mean, I've had my experiences with men that seem not to want to talk about their problems, but I think a really important question there is, why don't they? And how does that relate to the 78% of suicides being men? So, the point I want to touch on that is, so, consider those 2 points there. This men have trouble talking about, or for whatever reason it's difficult for them to talk about how they feel, the suicide rates, and now watch this reaction to Dr. Warren Farrell giving a speech at I think it was University of Toronto about all of these issues, about male suicide, about workplace deaths, male disposability, about the about sort of the abuse of young boys being put onto Ritalin to control their moods and their energy, etc. So just watch this. It's just so egregious.
Frustrated. I was studying all today, and I took time out of my studies to come here.
Would you like to ask him why he's here?
I'm not sufficiently convinced that I'll receive an answer that isn't what I've presented.
2 of my friends committed suicide, and I want the peace of understanding why that happened.
Wow. When did this happen?
It happened about 2 years ago. It was one after the other, like that.
Did you expect to get some addressing of suicide issue at the talk here?
Yes, I did.
What I have to ask on that, and I'll ask you, is why this space to talk about that? Like feminism, for example, offers lots of spaces to talk about mental health issues, talk about depression, both in men, women, and people who don't identify within the binary.
I think everybody's voice should be heard. I wondered why the security was trying to keep me back, and I think it's for my own safety.
This is what men's rights look like! 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 Get them murdered! They're fucking scum! Fuck you! They're fucking pigs!
How do you sleep at night, man? You fuckers.
So you believe it's hate speech, right?
It is hate speech.
I've never heard him before. I don't even know what he's talking. I've never heard of him before.
We invite you to educate
I just
yourself.
so I just wanted to listen to him.
Go on Google.
I just wanted to see who this guy is and what he's talking about. But now I can't get in.
You should be fucking ashamed of yourself. You're fucking scum. You are fucking scum. Fucking rape apologist, incest supporting, woman hating, fucking scum.
Is there someone else I can wait to see one following?
Fucking scum. Yeah, just another.
I just want to listen to someone else's opinion. I'm not even on a side here. I just listen to as many people as I can.
You know what though? Why would you pay money to fucking support a fucking rape apologist if you weren't fucking one?
I never heard him say anything that was.
Well, it's fucking scum.
You have a ticket?
I'm laughing because it's so just outrageous. I mean, this level of hypocrisy is just out of control. I mean, one thing I love that I think her name is Karen Strahan. I don't know if I've never heard it pronounced out loud. She was doing a discussion question at a men's rights talk, and one of these students gets up and starts talking about how, something about how men don't need safe spaces, or how it's unnecessary. Well, her point is, consider yourself at that Warren Farrell protest that you just watched, going to listen to issues about male suicide, about the crisis of young boys in education, all of these particular men's issues, and you have some woman up in your face screaming at you, yelling at you, yelling these, like cursing, whatever at you. How do you think you'd feel? Probably not very safe, considering the dimension of the relation to a man and a woman fighting compared to a man and a man fighting is infinitely different, because men have the ability, without being morally questioned after, to defend themselves if they're aggressed upon by another man, but they don't have that opportunity in public, or else we've seen what will happen. So it's like, I don't understand how this emergence of this far left can't quite grasp or thinks that it's morally justified to act in this way against men's issues when they're at the same time demanding respect for all of these marginalized identities. So in their pursuit of justice for these marginalized communities, they're in turn marginalizing the one who they see as the aggressor completely. So it's just outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. I mean, I don't even know another word to describe it. I mean, once I went down this rabbit hole, it's hard to... It's part of why I, too, don't call myself a feminist. And so another dimension of this, too, is Cassie J. So the one who made the red pill. So I know I've been talking loosely about it, and I've been sort of just giving my own analysis of it in the context of what they said and this notion of male disposability. But Cassie J made this documentary for, I can't imagine someone making this for better reasons. She made it because she wanted to understand these issues. She wanted to understand this group more. So she went into it, asked people questions, understood the issues, made an amazing documentary about it, and the opposition she was met with from people who didn't even watch it is just ridiculous. People who just automatically assume that because it's something to do with men's rights or a men's rights movement, that it automatically denounces feminism and that it's anti-women and all of this nonsense. And in turn, she's suffered greatly her career. I mean, I'm going to show you a clip in which she's doing an interview. It's been a little bit of time since the documentary's been out, and she's literally moved to tears when the interviewer asks her a question about her career now, because she's been met with such opposition from the left. And this is apparently the new mentality of this new degree of far leftism, is that we're gonna shut anyone down who has a view that even remotely challenges our view or even seems like it could, in theory, oppose our view. So it's just absurd. So I'm gonna end this with, I'm gonna show you a couple of clips at the end of this of one of that clip of Cassie and how she was reacting to this, and also some clips of how she was treated about this documentary, and just reflect on this degree of just sheer irrationality and hysteria, absolute hysteria. And it's not new. Like, some of these clips are old, and it's still going. Even the recent interview with Jordan Peterson, the way that Kathy Newman was acting in that interview, like this just seems to form this new homogenous whole of hysteric irrationality that is the only identities that matter are marginalized identities, and how dare you, if you're not a marginalized identity, say anything that goes in opposition to anything any of these marginalized identities are saying is the case. I mean, it's just so absurd. So leave your feelings, your comments, your criticisms, anything I haven't included. So if you're a man and there are like some specific men's issues that you think are important and need to be discussed more, please enlighten me, because I'm sure I have not hit on all of them. I just tried to pick out the ones that seemed most related and important, like from my own female perspective, to incorporate here, to sort of give an introduction to. So if you have anything else, please leave it down below. I'd appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so, because that would be lovely. A link is, down there, or it will appear up here soon after these clips show. So watch these clips and think pretty hard about all this. And also, if you haven't seen The Red Pill, go and watch it right now, because it'll be a lot more meaningful to see how ridiculous these people are reacting to Cassie J after you know what's actually in the film. Like in this one Australian interview, I believe it's Australian, they didn't even bother watching the movie. Like, they contradict themselves infinite amount of times, like 4 different times. They contradict themselves about if they saw the movie first. They say they saw half of it, then they're like, oh, we didn't see all of it. And then they criticize her, like as if she's promoting misogyny or something. It's just so absurd. So oh my god. Watch, subscribe, like if you like this, etc.
If you wanted to make a film about the issues facing the modern man, why did you have to focus on the views of these extreme misogynists of the men's right movement, people like Paul Elam? Why do you highlight men's issues by promoting men who minimise women's issues?
Well, you have to see the film to see why I interviewed Paul Elam, because I had been a feminist of about 10 years before making the Red Pill movie, and all my previous work was about women's issues or gender, LGBT rights, gay marriage, that sort of thing. I've always been interested in gender politics, and I came across Paul Elam's writings on avoiceformen.com, and I was shocked and appalled and offended as a feminist woman. And so I decided to make a film about a voice for men and the men's rights movement and the large scope of that, because no one had ever made a film about the men's rights movement before. And so I interviewed 44 different people for this film, feminists and men's rights activists. And it's a very complicated topic when looking at men's issues. It is,
you're absolutely right. But it just seems to me that you don't really question their views in the film.
Did you see the film?
Well, we saw as much as we could because your publicist wouldn't send us the full thing.
I sent you the screener link actually to the full film.
So we watched as much as we could, yeah. But
you could also buy the film on Google Play, Vimeo, and
we
Amazon
tried to do that and we couldn't.
Be that as it may, it just seems from what I have seen of the film, there's not a lot of questioning of some of their views. That's all.
Yes, there is. Absolutely. If you've seen the film, you would see the questions that I asked and their answers. And this film is not propaganda. I'm not promoting any kind of view that the viewers should take away. It's simply a journey looking at what men's rights activists have to say, what the feminist rebuttal is, and the audience is able to make up their own mind.
Well, just on Paul Elam and about the questions that you asked him, did you ask him about his writings where he had encouraged people to go out and bash women?
Yes,
or about
I did ask him about all of that.
But was that included in the film? And what did he say about that? And did you agree with his original writings on that?
I do not agree with his approach and his kind of provocateur approach to these issues, but at the same time, the way that he tries to get people to listen is by offending them to get them to read his website. And ironically enough, that's what got me to make the film. Was I was offended by him, and so I looked deeper. I went down the rabbit hole, and that's the Red Pill movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've done a lot of reading around Paul Elam over the years. In fact, we've interviewed Paul Elam, and there's no denying that a lot of what he says is deeply misogynist. My concern, Cassie, is just is that in setting up these guys as the spokesman for the issues that men face, we promote an opposition between men and feminism that's counterproductive to the genders working together to solve everyone's problems.
My film looks at what men's rights activists have to say, all the different voices and approaches to this conversation, and what feminists have to say, and it's just allowing the viewers to make up their own mind. I think we have to have this conversation about what is going on for men in family courts and male disposability and falling behind in education and paternity rights and all of these things.
I totally agree that they are all conversations worth having. Why not have them with regular men, not guys who are in charge of the most misogynistic, anti-woman, anti-feminist organisations in the world?
I interviewed Dr. Warren Farrell, who is very even-minded. I also interviewed Mark Angelucci, an attorney who works on behalf of men's issues. I interviewed Fred Hayward, who is a father who lost his custody of his son. I interviewed plenty of very sound-minded people in the film, men's rights activists. Paul Elam is certainly one of the most, eccentric voices in the movement.
Sure.
And I, of course, have to show him.
Okay. Cassie, why did you decide to renounce your feminism after this and say that you're not a feminist anymore?
Well, you have to see the film to see what led me down there.
For all the people that haven't seen the film, can you just explain why you were not after just equality? Because isn't that what feminism is, just equality?
Well, I am for gender equality. I absolutely care about women's issues and girls being empowered full-handedly. That is my innate passion in life, was looking into women's issues. That's why I spent 10 years making films about women's issues, and I still hold true to that. But feminism is an ideology that really wants to keep the blinders on, just looking at women and girls' issues and blaming men for women and girls' problems. And they don't look at male victims, and I think we need to look at male victims if we're talking about gender equality.
Of course.
Sure.
I mean, I think you can be feminist and still, look at men's problems. I mean, you're talking about a very, very small slice of feminism that's got blinders on. It's like saying all feminists are like, it's like saying all women who are feminists are like the men's rights movements representing all men.
Feminism does blame men by the use of the word patriarchy to blame men for all the ills of the world. So feminism even blames men for their own issues, blaming it on patriarchy, so it's the fault of men. And it's a way to dismiss men's issues by blaming men for their own problems.
I don't think it's inherently blameful. But anyway,
all right, Cassie J.
It's an interesting discussion, a really interesting discussion, Cassie.
Thank you for being with us.
I would like to say I'm for gender equality. I'm for women's rights and men's rights now. And I'm not a men's rights activist, and the film was not funded by MRAs. That is a lie that's being perpetuated by Australian media. TheRedPillMovie.com.
All right, terrific.
Thank you.
I mean, well worth viewing.
Yeah, if you can get on to see it, which we haven't been able to on several occasions. All right.
Do the red pill over again would you do it? Would you do it different in any way, or would you not even do it at all?
It had to be made. Someone had to make it, and I think I possibly am the only one that could have made it in the way that it was made and released. And in a lot of ways, I do think it was career suicide.
Maybe.
Sorry, hold on. It's been tough. Yeah, it just really goes to show how difficult it is to talk about these things, and when you do start to talk about men's issues or this alternate perspective on gender issues, you will be made an example of by the media, and they will skewer you and show everyone else, don't do it, or we'll do to you what we're going to do to these people who are trying to speak up.